Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, sponsored by the IBCA. We are a global podcast that shares the passion for the coaching profession. You will hear the stories of coaches from all around the world. We are covering the profession in game, outside of the game, and anything in between. As always, thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing the coaches' stories with you. All right, we are back with another episode of the After the Timeout podcast. Today we are very excited. We have Pete McBride on, head boys basketball coach at Hoffman Estates High School. Coach, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for your flexibility and getting me on. And I'm well aware of the guests and the quality of guests and the people you have on the podcast. And I think what you guys talk about is really important. So truly an honor to be here.
Well, we really do appreciate that. So just like a basketball game, we like to start every episode with a segment we call opening tip. It's kind of just your opportunity to kind of talk to our guests about kind of your journey, how you got to where you are, maybe your current team a little bit, and just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So grew up in Arlington Heights, went to Prospect High School, played 3 sports there. Was a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none, but I loved sports, loved the experience of sports, the relationships built through sports, the lessons learned through sports, and just loved the game and knew I wanted to be a coach at a pretty young age. So I was around it a lot. Got coaching pretty early on. When I was in college, actually, I started back at the alma mater coaching the Prospect feeder team, 6th graders. Really enjoyed that. When college was over, got a teaching job at a middle school in Waukegan, started coaching at Maine East, where my dad was actually a social worker and kind of connected me with the coaching staff there. Had a great experience there, loved my time there, learned a ton under Dave Jennis, had some really cool opportunities there, met some amazing people. Left Maine East after 4 years to pursue my master's degree in teaching. Got that through North Park University, where I was a graduate assistant there. And just really wanted the experience of the college game. Was curious if it was something I wanted to continue to pursue. Had a great experience, but really ultimately felt that my purpose and calling was in the classroom and being around high school kids. So went from there to St. Charles East for a year with Pat Woods, who I had a prior relationship with. Had a wonderful experience there, had a really good team there, and got hired at Hoffman Estates High School as a teacher first. Weren't any coaching openings there. So I started over at Schaumburg, just down the street, 2 years there as the sophomore coach under Wade Heisler, where he and I worked really closely together. Learned a ton about the game, just running a program with him. And from there, I was hired in COVID 2021. The sophomore job was open at Hoffman. Spent the year there. Really unique experience, just like it was for everyone with COVID going on. And was hired the following year as the varsity coach. And been running the program ever since. This is year 5.
Yeah, that COVID year was interesting. I got my first head coaching job during the COVID year, so that was a thing. So, okay, let's talk about your time as an assistant, right? Obviously you said you had some experience, but maybe what were your kind of greatest eye openers, and kind of what did you learn about yourself? And then I'll go into a second part here.
Yeah, I think, when you reflect on your time as an assistant, now that I'm a head coach, it's really interesting. You really, as an assistant, you really just get to focus on the basketball. You really get to focus on showing up, doing your job, a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and really, none of the administrative, the logistical work and everything that goes behind that. So I definitely learned a lot just about the game and grew my knowledge in the game as the assistant. And your relationships with the players are really different. They're really unique and really special. And being younger, fresh out of college and spending some time at the varsity level right away really gave me a good opportunity to connect with the guys, being closer in age with them, getting to know them differently. And I think, just my time as an assistant, being around such a variety of programs, variety of head coaches, and really good leaders really prepared me and equipped me to be a head coach when I was. So I'm really grateful for the variety in those experiences and the opportunities I had from a young age.
Okay, so then looking back, right? Woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? But what would you maybe have done differently in approach, or what you tried to tell maybe your assistants, a lesson you learned of, I tried this, but it didn't work, or I went about it this way and it didn't work?
I would say as an assistant, I would have paid more attention to all the behind the scenes stuff that goes into coaching. I think when you're an assistant, you kind of focus a lot on your practice, your games, and you don't really have that full program perspective until you're thrown into the fire and you're forced to do that. So I would say, as someone who aspired to be a head coach, I knew it was something I wanted to do. I certainly would have really approached that with a little more curiosity on what goes on really as a program leader rather than head coaching. I think if you learn the game, you love what you do, head coaching is something you're certainly interested in. And then I think it's really the program running aspect of it that you really don't know about until you're forced to be in that situation as a leader. And I think I would have taken a little more of that approach behind the scenes if I were to do it again.
First of all, I didn't know you started as a 6th grade boys feeder coach. So did I. And second of all, I'm a social worker, and I know you said your dad was. So we're already vibing. So I like that vibe already.
Yeah.
Coach.
Awesome.
So now as a head coach, what did you kind of take, first of all, from maybe some of those head coaches that you applied? I'm going to break this up, that you applied when you became a head coach.
All sorts of things. I think I think back to even my playing days, and having a variety of coaches then. I think with every athletic experience or even leadership experience you have, you take a little bit from each person that you learn from, you leave some things and you really try to take it all in and try and mold it into who you are and figure out what your leadership style is. So uniquely from each of my leaders that I worked with and head coaches I worked with is whether they were teachers by vocation or not, they were teachers first. And that was their calling, and their purpose was greater than basketball. Basketball was the vehicle, but I think the purpose, and I know the purpose for each of them was kids first, and having a positive impact on students, athletes' lives, building relationships with them that last beyond basketball and go deeper than basketball. And I think when you spend time around people like that, it really inspires you to do the same. And I think if you stay connected to kind of that purpose within coaching, you'll be able to do it for a really long time. And if not, I think you get a little burned out. So I'm really grateful to have spent some time around each of those guys that really were deeper than basketball. I learned a lot about the game, but there's a variety of ways to do that. I think it's really about the people when it's all said and done. I'm pretty grateful for those experiences.
So I want to kind of tie this just for kind of the second part, because I think it's good perspective as someone, you work for some great people. Pat Woods was on our show as well. But, now that you're a head coach, how do you kind of help your assistants that maybe want to, be a head coach or, have similar goals that you had? How do you kind of help them grow? What roles and responsibilities do you give them to kind of help your assistants maybe take that next step?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have those conversations with your staff and kind of know what their goals are within the profession, within the game. I kind of have a good mix of that within my staff right now. And I think, the best way to kind of help them grow is, number one, well, within every program, you ideally want alignment, right? If at the end of the day, it's about preparing players to play for the varsity, and then the varsity to, succeed in whatever they're going to do after high school. I'm really grateful for a staff that's bought into that and is bought into our culture. I think, when hiring a staff, one thing I've learned is getting the right people on board first and foremost. You could teach the game to anybody. People can learn the game very quickly. And I think when you have people that are on board that have a shared mission and are low ego, I think that's really, really important for having a successful staff. So to help them develop, one thing I'm really transparent about is at Hoffman Estates especially, we're the most diverse high school in the state. And we get, one group doesn't always look the same, so we've run a variety of different things offensively, defensively, and it really depends on your personnel. So I really try to give our coaches some autonomy in that, giving them some options and really having some conversations with them. Hey, your group's got some size. Let's think about this. Hey, your group's really, really quick. You've got a bunch of guards. Let's space the floor. Let's look at this. I think if I were to have my lower levels do everything I'm doing, I don't know if that helps them grow. And I don't even know if that's best for the program. By the time those kids get to varsity, I don't know if I'll be running the same thing. So I think I've grown a lot in that way, is providing them options, resources, things like podcasts, things to read, things to think about, to really help them cater them to the way they want to grow. Whether it's someone who wants to take over a program, whether it be basketball, another sport, whatever. I think that's really important to share those resources, to have those kind of conversations with them, to be that kind of example for them, but to also make sure that we're still challenging our staff, even if they're content with the level they're at, doing what they're doing.
Okay, so that's a really good lead in. You're talking about you running different things based on your personnel and stuff. Let's talk about how you use film then, right? Because that's obviously going to be important. Like you said, you might have a different group. So maybe you're flipping something, but you probably still have some carryovers from, the last year that maybe did something else. So, once you get into it and you kind of decided, how are you using film to help your players evolve system wise, but maybe, skill wise and personal wise, with what they're doing on the floor.
Yeah.
Like how do you kind of do it? How do you make sure they're learning from it?
Yeah, we love film in our program, in our team. I definitely watch too much of it. And a unique thing I'll probably want to talk about later is just finding that adequate balance of watching yourself versus watching your next opponent. That's something I'll want to talk about at some point. But one way that we use is we film every practice. And that's for players to watch, but it's also for my lower level coaches to watch too. So we can have some alignment there. They can kind of see how we go about things. They can take some things, leave some things like that. So I think that's a really good opportunity to learn. And we spend a lot of time, especially those first 2 weeks when you're installing, you're teaching, you're learning, it's competitive and you're really focused on yourself. That's where we do a whole lot of learning and a whole lot of film breakdown and practice. As the season goes on, it's really important to find that equal balance of, okay, last night was good or it was bad, whatever, but this is something we need to learn from. We need to chop this up. We need to break this down and we need to talk about it before we move on to whoever's next. And my assistant, Javon Stricker, we kind of almost approach it like a coordinator role where he's kind of my defensive coordinator. And we give him a lot of responsibility, a lot of autonomy that way. And he's really, really good at going back at games and finding really good teachable moments defensively for our guys, walking that through with them and making sure we do take the time to watch ourselves and learn to grow from it.
All right. So you kind of open it up. Then you want to talk about that balance of you and other teams. I guess, what are your thoughts on that? How do you go about it? Right. Because you could prepare for everything, but that's impossible too. Right. You also gotta do what you do. So, you maybe expand on the thought there that you wanted to talk about and go from there.
Yeah, I think we're always trying to seek that perfect balance, and it could depend on your group. It really can. It can depend on your group. If you have a group that's really into and really takes in and is good at the preparation piece, I think it's important that you address both. But as I've done this longer, I've just learned, we have 3 games this week. We play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Very little time to prepare. We're going to see zone 2 of the 3 games. Each 3 team kind of plays uniquely. So, especially entering the new year, it's really important that we stay fresh and we talk about playing our best basketball through the end of the year. And I think that's going to require more self-reflection on ourselves than whoever we need to prepare for. And hopefully we're playing in a way that our identity is hopefully strong enough in what we want to do and what our principles are that we're ready for whatever we might see. We've played enough games. We know what we want to be defensively and offensively. Not a whole lot we haven't seen at this point. So I think now's the time where you really kind of need to double down on what you do well, making sure that you yourselves are improving and reflecting from the last game. So going into tomorrow, like the players don't have school. We have a later practice. So we'll bring them in a little bit earlier from that. We'll chop up. We played on Saturday. We'll take a look at that film before we move on to the next. So try not to overwhelm them with too much. So I think seeking that balance of making sure that we're still growing from where we needed to go from where we were before. How do we prepare for the next one? And just kind of keeping guys engaged that way is really important.
So I kind of want to break this up into a few things because I kind of want to tweak this a little bit. But, first, we kind of have started to ask this in almost every episode, but I think it is, a really good topic for young aspiring head coaches. So, when you were going for your head coaching job, now granted, I know I'm sure you were like me, when you're going for your first head coaching job, pretty much anybody that's willing to make you a head coach, you're like, sounds good to me. When you're going for a head coaching job, maybe what are the things you were looking for in a program prior to taking that job?
Sure. Well, it helped being in the building. That was really important to me. Already being a teacher at Hoffman made that a particularly appealing job, you know. But things I look for in a program, I just feel like, you know, with my wide range of experiences, I felt like I was prepared for a wide range of things and a wide range of people, you know, and being at a diverse school that I love teaching at and a program that I was really fond of made it a really natural fit for me. You know, when the opportunity came, it was kind of a no-brainer for me to pursue, but also, you know, a place that I could see myself being at for a really, really long time. So I was really grateful. I feel like I'm really lucky that my first job was an ideal job for me, not necessarily a stepping stone.
And then kind of my second part is, and we really haven't hit on this with too many people, but when you took over, kind of what were maybe some of your goals, maybe in the first 3 months, in the first 6 months, in that first year to kind of establish yourself in your program and your direction and the way you wanted to take things. Maybe for somebody that might be in their first year as a head coach, kind of take it back to, when you took over, how did you kind of establish yourself and your program?
Yeah, it was unique times. I think, you know, we kind of talked about it was COVID. It was, you know, the middle of COVID, you know, and we were just coming off that. My first season was spent playing with masks on, you know. So that was unique. And even getting in touch with the guys was a unique experience as we were kind of in a hybrid school mode. And you know, it was also a unique experience because the truth is, you know, a lot of times when people take over a program, maybe it needs a big rebuild or a facelift or a big culture shift. And that really wasn't the case at Hoffman. I took over for Luciano, who was there for 10 years and had a really, really strong culture. You know, the program was in a good place when I took over. So really it was about taking what we have, the strengths of the building, the strengths of the school, the strengths of our kids, and just kind of putting our spin on it, you know, and figure out what we wanted to be known for, who we wanted to be. You know, we started with, you know, kind of our culture, our North Star, you know, some core values, some things that we felt we wanted to live by and be known for on the court and off the court, preaching that to our guys, getting them on board with that and really taking off from there. We really focused on the identity piece first, and that's something we're always tweaking and always looking to grow each year that we do this.
All right, so let's go back to the I guess film aspect, but just in general for halftime adjustments here, kind of the halfway point. You're looking at as a coaching staff, not necessarily players, right? You're roughly probably halfway through your season, I guess, right?
Yep.
Close enough. You know, it's about that time, right? And you're trying to look at you probably had a little break here after holiday tournaments and all that. So now you're looking at, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what do we have to do the rest of the year to be playing that best ball when we go into, you know, regionals, sectionals, all that. So how are you as a staff kind of breaking that down, whether it's numbers, whether it's film, whether it's certain actions for players that might do things well, or eliminating something that just hasn't worked, or, you know, a tweak, whatever. What do you kind of go through that process for us of how you're making those adjustments for your second half to be clicking on all cylinders when the time comes for playoffs?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's funny you bring up halftime, and I'm going to shout out Mark Cassio on this. There's a podcast where they talked about adjustments in general. And they talk about, like, before you make any adjustments, number one, are we playing hard enough? Number two, do we have the right people on the floor? And then three, do we actually need to make an adjustment? And a lot of the times you can stop after one or stop after two. You know, are we playing hard enough? Do we have the right people in the game, et cetera? So I always often start there. You know, what's it going to take for us to be playing our hardest? And I think as the season goes on, and something I want to talk about is keeping your guys fresh, you know, throughout kind of the dog days of January, where it's kind of harder to show up to school, kind of harder to show up to practice. You got a lot of games, not a whole lot of practice. Conference is kind of picking up. And to your point, to make sure that you're playing your best, I just think mentally and physically you need to be feeling your best. And in order to do that, I think our guys need to be physically fresh. They need to be mentally fresh. I think staying positive with them is really important. And in terms of tweaks, I think just, you know, in terms of identity, we're off to a good start. You know, we have a good record right now. We're off, you know, we're playing pretty well. But I think any tweaks you do should really just be to consider, like, what gives us energy? What's exciting for the guys? What amps the pressure up a little bit? You know, what's more exciting, rather than, I think, just adding plays to your bag or adding whatever, just kind of adding things for them to think about. I don't know if that's as helpful for us. It's just something that gives us some energy. whether it be a new trapping scheme, or whether it be something we can do out of a timeout. I think those keep guys excited and invested and really help you play in your best basketball, hopefully towards the end of the year.
So as we go into the second half, with every guest coach, we like to focus on a specific topic. And I'll be honest, I saw your team over winter break play about a game and a half. And I was very impressed. You guys were just so organized, and the guys play so hard and were so hungry. And just their execution of some of the things you did offensively was just super fun to watch as a coach. So for this topic, we really want to focus with you kind of on some situational basketball in the shot clock era, because for all of us, it's newer, it's exciting. I think it's kind of rejuvenated some coaches, to be honest with you, too. So I think it's something that is very exciting. But I kind of want to start off with, when I saw you guys play in person, you guys execute a bunch of sets really, really well. I'm at a very high level. Granted, it did look like you had somewhat of an older team, but they executed so well. So the first part of this is, how much practice time goes into learning these things, and do you kind of run similar ones each year or change it up?
That's a great question. I appreciate that. For all the credit goes to our guys. We have a group that wants to be good, a group that wants to learn, and a group that if something is required to win, they're willing to do it. And if that's something we add offensively, they're all in. And they have pretty high basketball IQs, and we have really good leaders. So, all the credit goes to them for that. But yeah, in terms of installing things, we really spoon feed it a little bit at a time. We try not to overwhelm the guys too much. As I've done this longer, we've spent a lot less time like 5-on-0, and just kind of running through plays on air, and just a lot more time doing things either live or being kind of concept based, So I think in the game with the shot clock, you have some more opportunities for more isolated possessions that were, where you can call a set that get you kind of into your stuff. But for us, I think Ben Johnson says something similar. We want different things to look the same and the same things look different, and we run the ball screen continuity, and any set that we run or action that we run, we want to make sure that the action behind the action flows within that spacing, and that we're in a spot where, okay, the set's blown up. What do we do from here? And making sure that we have flow behind each action. And, really good players make that look a whole lot better than it probably is. But when you have guys that kind of know why they're running, what they're running, and what we want the results of each action to be, what do we want it to flow to, they run things a little bit better, a little bit more effectively. So huge credit to our guys for being able to execute that.
I'm going to kind of do a follow before the second half, but I think a lot of coaches attempt to, put their specific sets and have it go into the flow kind of seamlessly. Todd and I, we're basketball nerds, so I won't speak for you, Coach, but I'll speak for us. And we watch a lot of basketball, and I think some high school coaches do struggle with kind of tying their sets into their flow. How do you feel like you guys are able to connect them so seamlessly?
Yeah, well, anytime we introduce something new, we talk about where you are on the floor if the play's broken up, and how do we get to our flow from there. I think it's really important, when you're putting something in, I think it's really important for me to be mindful of, okay, how do we get back to wave from here? If I have my 5-man here, my 4 here, do I have 1 up, 1 down? Are we within our spacing where that can be fixed pretty quickly? And I think really, in addition to that conversation, you have to play. You have to do a lot of playing in practice, and especially when you practice against yourselves and the set you're guarding, you run into that a lot. You have to flow from there. So you blow up your own set. Now what? And really defensively, we thrive on that. If we can be a team that scouts pretty well and we can blow up your initial action and there is no flow, that's a huge advantage for us, especially in the shot clock game, when there's not a whole lot to go to beyond your initial action. So defensively, we love that. But offensively, it's putting guys in spots where that's easy for them. And it's a lot of playing in practice where they kind of have to problem solve.
So with the shot clock, right, obviously it changes some things, right? You got to have more special situations, right? Late shot clock, things like that. So how did you go about kind of planning that? And then maybe talk about, like you talked about your flow, right? Your sideline and bounds or your blobs kind of flowing into your offense, because really, with the shot clock, you only have so much time, right? Like You run this, you don't get it, you can't, all right, we're going to pull it back out, set up again. Now, next thing you know, there's 10 seconds and you're gone, right? Like you gotta do something. So how did you kind of plan that and get prepared for those special situations to where you're flowing, or late shot clock type things, and different ideas like that?
Yeah, I think it was unique. That's the only time we've played with the shot clock. We haven't had any other games with it. And we had a non-conference game on the 22nd. We had a practice the 23rd, and that was our only practice before the holiday tournament. So we really spent one practice just kind of actively using it. We were preparing for it. And just what we found is just the way we play, we weren't really thinking about the shot clock a whole lot. We often we want to get a good shot well before that, so we practice a lot with transition, early offense, things like that. So I don't know how many situations we found where it was like 10 seconds left, let's get into something. But I will say, my point guard, Torrey Baskin, it's really nice. He was the best player on the floor every game we played. And, I had my sophomore coach joined us on the bench for a few of the games. And he said, I wish I could just call single, which is just our high ball screen within our flow. I wish I could call single and get a bucket every time, and that was kind of happening from time to time. So when you put the ball in the hands of a player like that draws so much attention, he's also really smart. He understands time and score. He understands spacing, shot selection, everything you could ask for in a best player and a point guard. So, putting the ball in his hands and kind of having 3 to 4 go-to things within our flow that naturally get us kind of quick shots was kind of our plan, whenever the shot clock got down to 10, whether we were seeing man or zone. So that was really helpful for us.
It does make it a lot easier when you can say, here's the ball, kid. Okay, I'll follow with that then. Every coach does this. I'm sure you did it, right? And thinking future wise, to go back to it, after that shot clock experience, right? Kind of maybe what notes did you write down for yourself and ideas after reflecting on it and playing in it to be like, okay, well, the shot clock is coming full time, right? Let's think of this going into, when we have it. Not for this year necessarily, but for the future. I know I do it. You're like, oh, we got in that situation. You're like, okay, well, forever in this, and just thinking about it, and because that's how coaches' minds work, right? You're always thinking about something else, right?
Yeah, I think it's funny. When I have conversations about the shot clock, I find myself going to the defensive side of the ball a little bit more often. So offensively, truly, like for us and a lot of the teams we play, not all of them, a good amount of the teams we play, get a good shot off or want to get a good shot off well before, the shot clock winds down. So we didn't notice it a lot of the time. But defensively, like for a team that really likes to pressure like we do, and a team that likes to get the ball and go and wants to increase the number of possessions, having to guard for 30 seconds and finish a possession rather than, we've seen teams that want to hold the ball for a minute, 2 minutes, and just reverse. And, it can be hard to stay engaged for that long and finish a possession that long, so I just think defensively, it really plays into how we want to guard, how we want to defend. I do think you'll see a little bit more zone once it's full time, that coaches can kind of go to that defensively, and offense can't just hold the ball and kind of stall you out. So we think about it a lot from the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, it's been pretty organic.
Well, you led that perfectly into, I was going to talk about defense with the shot clock. A couple other things I noticed, Coach, when I watched your games where you kind of, especially in the second half, you started changing up defenses a little bit. You did give some zone looks. You did give some zone pressure looks. So, as we move into the shot clock defensively, and now you're going to see Todd's smile the whole time because this is his jam. But what are things you are thinking about doing defensively to kind of throw some opponents off?
Yeah. First and foremost, depends on our personnel, our lineups on the floor. We're playing about 7 guys right now. So having zone in your bag is really important for us, whether it's protecting for foul trouble, energy levels, whatever. But I think, when you play a team that's really set based, like we played Downers Grove North yesterday, a lot of really good offensive actions, really well coached team. And, with one day to prepare, we simply didn't have time to go over their baseline and sideline stuff. there were too many actions and they were so good at them. So we just kind of decided on the baseline, on the sideline, we're going to switch it up. Or after a timeout, when I know he's drawing something up that maybe we haven't seen, or that he masks really well that we can't identify, that's kind of where we take those opportunities to kind of mix things up defensively, to kind of keep the other team off their toes, or just to kind of give ourselves a little bit of an advantage, or hide some things, for them offensively.
All right, so let's talk about now, like end of game, right? And I guess maybe it's your perspective, right? You're thinking about 2-for-1s or fouling, right? Like, when to use timeouts, kind of maybe what did you learn, as you're going through it and you look up and you're like, oh man, I probably should have called a timeout, or, we could have gotten an extra basket, or, even just how to extend games, right? At the end, maybe, you get down 10, but there's still 4 minutes left. How can we, I guess it's a more of a mindset thing, but how kind of to extend games and end of games, and trying to, maybe some things you notice, or whatever it may be. Because I think everybody, some teams play more than others, but I think everybody's kind of wondering, like I coach college, so we deal with it all the time, right? Like it's just natural to us, right? But, maybe you can help some other coaches think of something, going into it, or when they have to use it in a shootout, or, whatever it may be, to things that you notice that you might think of coming into game.
Yeah, one thing, we use some terminology, given end of game situations, if we're down, like you kind of described, down 10, 4 minutes left, shot clock game, that's still a lot of basketball left, not shot clock, that you start to feel like you got to amp the pressure up a little bit. So that really makes things different. If we're in a situation where we feel, let's amp the pressure up, let's start trapping, let's start rotating, let's increase the pace here. We're in hot. Hot is active traps, rotate up. On the complete opposite of that, end of game, if we don't want to foul, we just want to be solid, we call it ice. So we talk about those kind of two different things, and foul is fire. So kind of having that terminology and alignment is at least helpful for our guys. And sometimes, you have those conversations, if you have some good leaders like we do, when we're in timeouts, we kind of check in with them here. Like, you feel like we could go hot here. You feel like it's time. You guys feel like we're solid. They're on the floor. They have the best pulse for, what is going to work best for us at the time. So especially if you have some veteran players, some leaders, and a connected group of guys, we have those conversations in timeouts, with guys, or what look they're more comfortable in. Maybe I think we need to shift to zone, but if they're enjoying guarding this group and they trust their ability to do that, it's really about what they're going to do and what they're bought into doing at a high level with energy. So we actually, we also like using timeouts after made baskets. If it's after a made basket, we still have the momentum. Let's bring it in. Let's talk about it, and let's double down on what's working, and it can depend game to game. I'd almost rather burn one after something like that happens, than we can set up something new or keep them on their toes, rather than, they're on some huge run. Emotions are high. Guys are coming in. Who knows where their heads are at? And it depends on the situation. But if we can control the game to an aspect, or we get a score, let's talk about it defensively. That's where we feel we've gained the most advantages on that end.
Okay, so you brought up an interesting point. I want you to talk about your teaching points on those different things, like your fouling, right? Obviously, if you're going hot, you're probably trapping more, whatever, out of whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
But maybe is there certain places you want to trap, certain things you're looking for, and then with your ice, right, you're trying to just play solid, but what are your teaching points on that as well, right? Is it some coaches are going to just switch everything?
Yep.
Maybe you're going to give more space. Maybe depending on the situation, you're going to run somebody off a 3-point line, make them get a 2. Sure. So I really like that concept, because it's just one word to know. So you work on it through the season, right? You go, right. Hey, we're in fire, we're in ice, we're in hot, right? But how do you go, teaching them? What are your teaching points within those concepts to, so your players know, okay, we're in ice. This is what we're doing.
Yeah. Shoot. This is another thing when your season goes on, is just finding the time to make sure you work on situations. That's really important. Putting some guys in some different spots. Shoot, maybe you play it in practice, you play a game to 5 and then play a live 2-minute clock from there. Just putting them in a variety of situations, maybe you make a bad call on purpose, see how they respond to it, or just, create a situation that's going to be difficult, or create a situation where they're up 3 and they need to get a stop, but we don't want the clock to stop, or whatever the situation is. So putting them in those situations, it's mostly just kind of to teach them what we're okay with, what we want to happen, what we certainly don't want to happen. Just as importantly, we're a switching team anyway, unless we're in some rare circumstances. That's kind of our identity. So we kind of just we don't want them to overthink things, but we do want to double down on what our principles are and make sure that those are strong, and just kind of making sure they know exactly what the plan is, what we want out of a given situation or possession.
So I want to go into our last 2 segments. The first one we call 30-second timeout. It's your opportunity to kind of run the show. It can be anything you want to talk about. It can be something you want our listeners to know about. You can turn the tables and ask Todd and I a question. Kind of your dime, your dance floor.
Yeah, I want to hear from you guys. As you guys are coaching, we're in similar parts of our season. January hits, kids are back at school, dog days of the season kind of coming. How do you guys approach practice as the season goes on? Are you more 90 minutes, an hour, full 2 hours? Do you try to amp things up a little bit less? What do you do to make sure that your teams are fresh? How do you guys approach practices this time of year? Is it different than earlier on in the season?
Yeah, so I can start and usually I say, Todd, you can start so I can think, but I kind of just had this conversation with my team the other day, and I said, guys, I've been a head coach for 10 years, and the 2 things I can tell you about January are the teams that win in January sometimes aren't the most talented. Sometimes it's the most healthy and the most invested. And I think if you can balance those 2 things as a coach, I will be honest with you, during the season, we typically play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So we don't practice like on the floor practice on Fridays. We'll just lift and do some rehab and do the scout and go home. So I think that's definitely one thing we do. Just like everybody, we shorten the practice times too as the season goes on. It goes from 2 hours to an hour and a half. We obviously we like to play really fast, so we do a lot of transition stuff. But I think it's also kind of like you said, coach, it's also giving your kids a voice. Like I'm real big on like I'm okay if some of my kids come to me and like, coach, we had 2 really big games, we're banged up. Can we please do some yoga today? Or can we please do some extra foam roll today? Or so I think sometimes it's just listening to your kids. Because I think, coach, your point is extremely valid that in January, sometimes it's you're so far from the playoffs, but there's no more holiday tournaments. I think sometimes it's just you're just taking it one day at a time and doing what's best for your kids.
Yep. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little different for us. We're pretty much in the heart of conference, so we're Wednesday, Saturday.
Yeah.
And we know it. Now, it naturally lends itself because Wednesday, Saturday, one of those days is a big scout day, right? Prep day. So you're going to take some time off and not be, as hard with it because of, film or whatever, you're going to be shortened up a little bit. And we have men's volleyball starting, we have men's basketball, so sometimes the time is limited, so we'll go pretty hard some segments, but then, we'll do a lot of shooting, a lot of like review on just execution stuff and, making sure we're up on our stuff, every once in a while, we got to put something in, whether it be, just reviewing like, hey, we got to double the post here and how do we rotate out of it. So you have to do that kind of live, right? Because otherwise it doesn't really work, and just getting the rotations. But we're trying to find that balance. We're lucky this year, we're pretty healthy. Whereas last year at this time we had about 8 kids that were healthy. That made a big difference. This year we're pretty healthy, so we can probably go a little bit harder at times. But it tries to be, quick, hard, right? Like, hey, let's be really focused, locked in. Let's get this. Yeah, we got a double. All right. Boom, let's do it. All right, we executed really well. Let's move on to the next thing. A lot of working on our own stuff. Maybe add a little tweak to it, right? A little adjustment for a team that does something. Maybe they ice, maybe they press, right? Because you're seeing a lot of different things. But you just try to find that balance of having to go live because you have to prepare, and then working on our stuff, like if it'll be transition, just yeah, we're not going live, but we're trying to go at a certain pace, right? To keep our conditioning, to keep it crisp, to keep it game like as possible, things like that. So it's a little bit different because we don't end up with a 3 game a week situation, right?
Yeah.
Like you guys do. So usually one of the days will be a little bit harder. Then the next day will be more, hey, are we locked in on the prep, shooting, maintenance type thing? So,
I would add to something I've learned maybe in my 10 years is like just add in an extra baseline out of bounds play every once in a while or a new action or just something to keep it fresh for the kids. Because if we
totally.
do the same thing over and over, at least with my kids, like I think it's good when you're like, hey guys, we got a new out of bounds play. And they're like, oh, a new out of bounds play. I think it just kind of keeps them invested. I don't know about your guys' coach, but that's definitely for mine.
Yeah. And then what we've been doing a lot lately is doing, like you said, coach, like we'll just sprinkle a situation in between drills.
Mhm.
Like, hey, there's 2 minutes on the clock, red team's up 2 points. The coaches will just take turns coaching the team. We got 3 coaches. So, we'll just take turn coaching, to where you can work on a set that we want. Hey, we're going to run this right here. So you're working on your stuff and executing, but you're also within that situation of knowing, okay, hey, we were up 4, we got the rebound. What kind of shot do we want? Right? We don't need to
Yeah.
be chucking a 3 here so they can go down and go. Or hey, we got a foul, free throws, things like that. So we'll sprinkle those in too. More situationally, just working on honing the execution. Now that we're like we talked about earlier, halfway through the season, we kind of know, okay, we got a good idea on lineups. We
Yeah.
got a good idea on what has worked with each group and each player, and then kind of honing in from there just to get the details and the execution down.
I love that. I think, a unique thing for us is the question I feel like my assistant and I are always talking about is, say we're playing, a conference opponent who's really physical, what's more important, that we're super healthy and energized and feeling good going into that, or trying to simulate that environment in practice so that come Friday, when you're knocked, physically, you've been there before, so it's kind of finding that balance. And it could depend on your group, whether what they feel they need, whatever makes them most ready and confident going into a game like that. I just feel like these are the conversations we're always having, and I'm always curious how other people approach it.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think sometimes it's on feel. You're like, okay, today we need to go hard, and you know what? Today we need to chill out.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move the quick hitters here. Last segment, rapid fire, kind of sometimes random, sometimes about basketball questions. So here's an interesting one. What is your coaching New Year's resolution for this year?
I saw this one. It's funny I think being a teacher and being a coach, like when the January 1st is just it's in the thick of things for me. It's really hard to I don't think about life in the number year.
Yes, yeah.
I think about it in the school year, in the season, you know what I mean? So, there's an author I really like. His name is John Gordon, who challenges kind of his followers, his people to think about one word instead of a New Year's resolution. Yeah, the one word.
Yeah.
And my word this year is just present. And for me, the way that applies in coaching is when it's time to coach, let's be present and coach. When it's time to be a dad, husband, let's be present there. Yeah. When it's time to teach, lead, other things, be present there. And I think, as we go into this part of the season, that's really important for me, is to keep that balance and for me to show up as the best version of myself for the team. So I think the word ties into who I need to be for my team, for my program, my staff, family, and everything. So that's my one word.
I like it. All right, favorite holiday movie?
I have to say Elf. I'm a huge Will Ferrell guy, and that movie just cracks me up, man. And my 4-year-old daughter's a little creeped out by him, the big guy in the costume, but I refuse to let that steal my joy for it.
Okay, favorite coach growing up?
Yeah, my dad was never my coach, but he's totally the person I look up to the most in leadership, and just approach with people. He's who I've learned the most from. So if I can cheat and say that one, but who I enjoyed playing for the most was my high school coach my senior year. John Camardella took over. He was my freshman coach. We had a great relationship then, and he got the varsity job. He was younger, and he got the job my senior year, which really made a great experience for me. His relationships and who he was a big piece in why I'm here today.
Now the question is, was your dad your favorite coach when you were growing up, or now that you're looking back?
In hindsight's 2020, right?
Because usually it's like, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about, and then you get
right.
to our age, and you're like, oh, crap, Dad.
Yeah, he was right.
He was right all the time.
Right.
Don't tell him that.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Hardest thing about the profession that people may not realize.
So much. I think coaching the games is the fun part. That's what everybody sees. I think it's the running a program part. It's the administrative stuff. It's the behind the scenes stuff. It's the managing a staff, managing all levels, the scheduling, fundraising, everything that goes into coaching that you don't see on the court. And you really don't know about it until you have to do it, until you're in the fire. So I would just say the program running piece. I think a lot of people could coach varsity basketball, or put together a great practice plan, watch the amount of film, coach the game, manage the game. But I think running a program piece really takes that extra effort that a lot of people don't realize.
Yep.
All right, so everybody has one of these stories. Great story from being a low-level coach, a head sophomore coach. Everybody's got a story or something somewhere. Your players got pulled up. You had to go. Like I know when I was coaching sophomores, I had to play 2 games in one day in 2 different places. Like that was great.
Yeah, but it's funny. So many to think about, but I think about like the most recent one when my first game coaching at Hoffman Estates was in the middle. It was like the first athletic event when COVID kind of opened back up. Like COVID was still happening, but they were letting people play again. And we were in masks. And I remember it was at Hoffman and there was no one in the bleachers, but they opened up the shelf area and they set up chairs around the top, like spaced out 6 feet. I remember the benches being 6 feet apart. I remember the refs having to stop play because a mask was under a kid's nose. I remember the kids being gassed in the third quarter because they hadn't played in forever and they were playing in masks. It was just really ugly basketball, but we were so grateful to be out there. And it was my first game, coaching at Hoffman, and just the most unique circumstances that you wouldn't believe, unless you were in it or you lived it. And it's really unique to think back. There's a picture, my wife took just of that game environment, and it's hanging up in our basement, and I'll never forget it.
Yeah, I think that's one of those times where, 20 years from now, people are going to be like, what are you talking about?
Right.
No, that didn't happen. Like they won't believe you.
Unbelievable.
You mean you don't have a season, you don't have a season, you don't have a season. By the way, you guys start Monday. Go.
Yes.
Right.
And it was like springtime, I think. I remember it was kind of, it was like March, April. It was kind of nice out.
And then like football was coming after it.
Right.
Like, okay, well, how do we do this one here?
First time I had the football players before their season, so I had a more fresher.
All right. Most memorable story as a player.
Yeah, I mean, as a player, I was fine. I was a good player. I wasn't, a star player. I was more of a role player. But for me, like I was such a basketball junkie. And when I, think back to growing up watching basketball, a big tradition of my dad and I was he would take me to the Wheeling Hardwood Classic every year growing up. Grew up in Arlington Heights. That was the local tournament. I'd go to watch Prospect. I think back to the 90s watching those Maine West squads, Lucas Johnson, those guys who went to state. And growing up, going to that tournament, it was like I looked up to those guys like they were superstars, so when we finally got to the tournament and I was playing in it, and even just like seeing my name, like on the side, they used to do those like cool, not like cardboard things. They put the names up. We got to keep it at the end of the tournament. Like I still have that. And just playing in that tournament after, attending it and seeing so many amazing players and teams and moments, going to that, it just as a tradition with my dad growing up, finally playing in it was really special to me.
You had to slide them in and out.
Yeah.
I'm a Wheeling grad, coach, so we're talking about the right thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Coach, we can't thank you enough for joining us today. Awesome insight, a lot of great ideas. You kind of got my brain going on the terminology for end of game stuff, the fires and stuff like that. I think that's a great way to put it, but I know, our listeners will enjoy it. We wish you best of luck the rest of the way. And thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate your time, guys. Really appreciate you guys bringing me on. Appreciate the conversation. This is a great time of year to have conversations like these as we kind of gear up for the second half of our season, and appreciate your guys' insight as well. Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast in partnership with the IBCA. Please be sure to rate us on whatever platform you are listening and give us a 5-star rating. For more show content and updates, please follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout. As always, thank you for listening. Tune in next time for more content on the court, off the court, and anything in between.